could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Welcome to the latest Beatles News Briefs podcast number 97, getting close to the magic number 100. I'm your host, Steve Marinucci. We're glad to have you with us today. This time out, we have as our guest the great Laurie Kaye, author of Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview. Stick around after the interview for some breaking news. But here's my talk with Laurie Kaye.
I'm excited to be talking to Laurie Kaye, who began her radio career at KFRC AM in San Francisco, right up the road from me, doing radio news, and was well known for interviewing many famous rock names, often for long-form radio specials. Her interviews included John Lennon and Yoko Ono, Paul and Linda McCartney and Wings, George Harrison, and George Martin. She was involved in the creation of the 14-hour special RKO Presents the Beatles, which was later expanded to 17 hours and renamed The Beatles from Liverpool to Legend. On December 8th, 1980, she interviewed John Lennon and Yoko Ono in what turned out to be his last interview, and this became part of a radio special tribute to him called John Lennon, The Man, the Memory.
And we're here to talk about your book, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview.
Laurie, welcome. It is great to talk to you.
Thank you.
How does it feel to be the interviewee and not the interviewer for a change?
Well, I feel less in charge of what's going on, that's for sure, since I'm not the one coming up with the questions, just the answers. But I love answering questions, so go right ahead.
I found your book was both a memoir and a confessional of sorts.
Well, absolutely. It's the story of my rock radio-related early life and career, wrapped around what tragically turned out to be John Lennon's last interview, which I co-conducted with my RKO team at the Dakota for RKO Radio on December 8th, 1980, mere hours before he was shot and killed. And I still consider it to be both the best and the worst day of my life.
It was your love of music that got you into the radio business. Who were the groups that you listened to before you got into radio?
Well, I listened all from the start to Little Richard and Elvis Presley and Chubby Checker and you name it, I heard them. And then all the way up from them to the Beach Boys, to Neil Young, to Jethro Tull, the Rolling Stones, Faces with Rod Stewart, and so many more, including Elton John. I loved them all. And then finally, when punk rock hit, it was so exciting for me because I could listen on the radio to the Ramones, Patti Smith, Blondie, The Clash, and the Sex Pistols. And of course, all the way through, I was listening to David Bowie all the time because I still consider him the best concerts I've ever been to practically. So tons and tons of musicians and bands have been my favorites over the years.
You listened to all sorts of genres. You didn't stick with one thing.
No, everything from pop to rock, hip hop, punk, reggae, and then finally country music too. And of course, a lot of hard rock, heavy metal too. So it's all important to me.
We have a couple of clips that you have provided us. The first one is with the Ramones, and they talk about the Beatles. And do you remember anything about talking to the Ramones, what that was like?
I love talking to the Ramones. It was Johnny and Dee Dee because Joey had been injured shortly before when he was about to start a concert in New York. And he got burned and he had to go to the hospital after the concert. And then he had to recover more. So he couldn't fly out to San Francisco with the other guys to be interviewed by me. But I loved talking to them about all the bands and the music they listened to when they were growing up and what they loved and the origin of punk rock and how they felt about it and what it was. And yeah, it was a great interview, one of my favorites.
Here's Laurie talking to the Ramones.
You want to have fun with your music, basically.
Yeah, we just want to have fun and be entertaining.
We
and
do have fun with it.
and make the kids have fun, and entertain them and let them see a good show.
What do you think the potential is for punk rock?
Well, it's just rock and roll. I mean, it's just rock and roll, and rock and roll's always been punk. I mean, when rock and roll first started, parents right away said, this is awful, this stuff. It's noise, I don't want you listening to this. It's going to make you sick, and the Beatles came out, and people were against the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and it's the same thing it's now. It's just whoever's good in punk rock will succeed, and whoever's not won't. And, the future is just, whoever's good will become big, I guess,
Who are some of the bands that you listen to?
Collect a lot of records, we listen to everything that's gone down in rock and roll since it started.
Cheap Trick.
I don't know, we listen to, everything. Mostly collect old records, If you mean what old stuff, Beach Boys, the Beatles, a lot of things. A lot of the bubblegum music that was out in the mid-'60s. And we listened to everything that's gone down, heavy metal, all the heavy metal groups, and, just absorbed it all,
Your book indicated that music helped get you through some difficult years as you were growing up. Talk about how music helped you.
Well, it helped me through my life being raised by a dysfunctional family. And so starting out as a toddler, I was able to get a gift from grandparents of a transistor radio with earplugs. So I'd spend practically all day and night plugged in, listening to the radio. And that really made my life incredible.
You said one of the things I noticed in your book is that you said you waited in a long line to see A Hard Day's Night. And I'm sure a lot of people listening here did the same thing. What were you looking forward to in the movie, and what did you think about it after you saw it?
Well, all of my friends who were excited girls who loved the Beatles like I did, we were too thrilled to be able to see A Hard Day's Night in a local movie theater as kids on a Saturday early show. And it was a great movie, even though everybody in the audience were practically teenage girls standing up and screaming and clapping the whole time. But it was really great. And then I got to go see it again last year for the 60th anniversary in a movie theater here in LA too. So it was awesome both times. I still love the movie.
What was your favorite Beatle?
Well, to be honest, they were all favorites of mine when I was growing up. Plus, I really dug John Lennon's intellectual and artist background. He was in art school and putting together the band, the Beatles, so he was probably my favorite without realizing it. Plus, of course, I totally dug Paul McCartney's adorable face and George Harrison's interest in India and Ringo Starr's ability to play drums and then sing as well. So I basically loved them all.
You said the Beatles helped you in your studies. How did they do that?
Well, they inspired me to do my best all the way around, especially when it came to writing, because I was so inspired by what they were doing. I thought, I'll try to do just as well.
But what was it that made you wanted to get into radio?
Well, because I loved listening to rock radio. Plus, I was told I had a good voice and I could talk and write really well. That convinced me too. And I knew that that would be the perfect career for me because thanks to B. Mitchell Reed, who was the DJ at KMET FM, who put me on the air and told me that he really liked my voice and how I came up with things to say, that I should consider being on the air as my career on radio. And so I definitely listened to him and my professor later in years at journalism school at UC Berkeley. So they were the ones who got me towards my career.
You talk glowingly in your book of Dick Clark. You worked very closely with him.
Dick Clark was totally amazing. The late, great, incredible TV and radio and every kind of star. And I wrote his weekly countdown radio show. That was the first thing I was hired for. And then he liked my writing so much, he begged me and then hired me to ghostwrite his nationally syndicated newspaper column. So I got to go to concerts and to interviews as though I were Dick Clark. And he became my really good friend. And I got to go to concerts like the US Festival and Talking Heads filming the Stop Making Sense movie. And it was just incredible to be able to kind of pretend I was Dick Clark, even though I obviously didn't look like him or anything. I did let people know that I was writing for him, so I was listening as though I were him.
Was he still doing Bandstand when you started working for him?
Yeah.
You also mentioned your association with Bill Graham, and here in the Bay Area, Bill Graham is worship.
Well, not only did I totally respect Bill Graham for producing the Rolling Stones Nicaragua benefit concert at the Forum here in LA and a bunch of others around the country, and I had won tickets to that show, front row seats, the first time I saw the Rolling Stones. And that was when I was in high school, and I won them on KMET, and that was incredible. And then I got to meet Bill Graham when I started working at KFRC, because we became friends, and he constantly offered me tickets to so many shows at venues that he owned. And
Lucky you.
yeah, my favorite venue of his was the Old Waldorf, where I got to see everyone from Iggy Pop to the Talking Heads to Tom Petty. But Bill Graham kept trying to get me to see the Grateful Dead, but I refused every time. He'd keep trying to hand me tickets in the station, which did not please him at all. Although I have to admit that when I finally moved to Bali in Indonesia, I got to hear the Grateful Dead's album, American Beauty, and I actually liked it.
And that is a fantastic album. You interviewed so many people. What was your stance going into interviews? How did you prepare? And especially what angle did you use to when you talk to them? Because one thing that is very clear in the book is that you did not get formula answers from these guys.
Well, I got as personal as possible. That was really important to me. And I did plenty of research, of course, and listened to as much music as they made. And I concentrated on what we all had in common, because that made it so personal. For example, with John Lennon, we had similar family upbringing or non-family upbringing, because he wasn't raised by his mother either and never met his father like I did. So that was something we had in common, as well as our love of the island of Bali. So I just tried to be as personal as I could with everybody I interviewed, and that really helped me.
Who was your favorite interview?
Well, I still consider our RKO radio interview with John Lennon as both the best and worst day of my life. Plus, I loved interviewing David Bowie and Mick Jagger, George Harrison, Paul McCartney, and George Martin. They were all great to talk with, too. And I would have loved to have interviewed so many other great musicians. A lot of them I did, but some of them I never did. I wish I could have interviewed Elvis Presley and the Steve Miller Band and AC/DC and tons more.
I think a lot of us would have loved to have interviewed Elvis Presley. Let's talk about your Beatle interviews. And I'm going to start with George Martin, and then we'll go through your experiences with each of the Beatles. What was it like talking with George Martin?
Well, George Martin was great to meet up with, because he was, first of all, incredibly complimentary to me right from the start, because he heard my 17-hour special, The Beatles from Liverpool to Legend, on the radio in England, and he listened to it twice because he loved it so much. And that just made me feel so great to hear him say terrific things about me, made me feel, wow, I can't wait to keep writing more and more and more. And George had just released his own great book, which was a bio called All You Need Is Ears, which really inspired me to think about writing my memoir years later. And of course, I eventually did. And the great thing was that George Martin autographed his book for me, just so friendly and lovingly. And I just really felt like we became close.
Okay, let's go through the Beatles, and I'll ask you about John last. But let's start with Paul.
Well, the Paul McCartney interview was incredible because RKO Radio sent me and the RKO team to London to interview Paul and Linda McCartney and their latest lineup of Wings, which included the late, great Denny Lane, who I was a huge fan of. And the really cool thing was that RKO brought me back from Seattle, where I was on the air doing news at King Radio. And I was also freelancing for RKO, but they said, no, you have to leave and come back and go back on the air at KFRC. And before then, we'll send you to London to do this interview. And wow, it was so exciting because I'd never been to England before. So that was really cool. And it's just amazing to talk to Paul McCartney and hear how much he loved Linda and loved writing songs with her and recording with her. And he said he never wanted to go on stage and do concert tours without her.
How was Linda?
Linda was incredible, and I really felt like I'd made a friend, and that's why I was so upset when she died years later. It really made me sad to find out.
You said one thing in your book, though, about your meeting with Paul and Linda, that you guys actually did smoke some weed together.
Yes, we did. People can read about that in my book, and they can read all about Paul McCartney kissing me, too. The George Harrison interview was really cool because it was the first Beatles member interview that I ever did. And it was at the tail end of 78. And it was right after he'd gotten married and had his kid, Danny. And that was incredible. And it was for two things that I interviewed him. It was not only to add to the update of the Beatles special, because it was becoming the Beatles from Liverpool to Legend, the 17-hour version, but also it was for another RKO show I was writing called The Top 100 of the 70s, which George's songs were going to be on. So it was great to talk to George and to hear everything he loved about being married to Olivia and to having his son and to doing gardening in his backyard in England.
And he was also promoting his solo album, the George Harrison album.
Now here's Laurie talking to George Harrison.
I want to, first of all, congratulate you on your new baby and on your marriage.
Thanks a lot.
And I want to ask you about your new album. Do you have a title for it yet?
No, actually, that's one thing I don't have is a title, so I'm just going to put the album out, just call it George Harrison.
What
People
kind?
can go in and say, have you got the new George Harrison album? That's what they normally say anyway.
What kind of feel does the album have? I mean, a lot of your other work has been spiritual and religious. What kind of feeling does the album have?
Well, I think all the songs on it are very optimistic sort of songs. They're not, I wouldn't call them spiritual songs. In fact, I don't think they're spiritual at all. I mean, in the sense that you mean, like My Sweet Lord or something like that. It's not like that type of song. But I think, in many ways, the sort of typical George Harrison tunes, they have, you know, the same slide guitars, and it's still me singing. But the album is just a very up album. And all the songs are the sort of music that has melodies to them, you know. There aren't those noisy sort of songs. They're all melodious.
Here's Paul and Linda talking to Laurie about the decision to have Linda join the band.
It's a weird situation, really. I mean, some other people have said the last thing they do is to take their old lady on the stage with them. When we were forming the group the first time, the Wings, I just said to her, you know, do you fancy it, or would it be too much? And she said she fancied it. We tried it just to see if it would work at all.
For Linda, a photographer, this would be a completely new experience, and she was nervous about it at first. In fact,
to a couple of gigs, I really felt sorry for her because she'd like cry before them. It was terrible.
Well, it was hard at first because I really couldn't play very well. And so to be playing with real musicians, it's a bit of a hang-up for them. Well, I had fun all the time, mind you. It was a good laugh. I started feeling comfortable after I'd done it a few times, once I started knowing what I was doing.
Here's Paul giving Laurie his opinion on books written about the Beatles.
It's weird because there's only 4 people who know what went on in the Beatles. Even no matter how close you were to the thing, the minute you weren't actually part of the 4 people who were going through it, you can't know really because there's so much just happens off the camera or off the microphone, which is all the real stuff. So unless the 4 people sit down or unless it comes exactly from the horse's mouth, they're always a bit wrong.
I asked if he was referring to any specific books about the Beatles, remembering how George Harrison had told me they tended to be primarily fiction.
Oh, yeah. In books about me, I've never yet read any one book that kind of tells the truth. Because even, there's one called The Official Autobiography of the Beatles by Hunter Davis, where he came round and sat us all down and talked to us and got all our recollections. And he's got most of it there. But it's still not quite right. But it still doesn't capture the real feeling that went on. Although it does, that probably does the best job of all of them.
Then Paul, unsurprisingly, brought up the book I'd previously discussed with George, written by their first band manager, whom I'd been able to interview not long before.
There's a book by Alan Williams, and he's just got us as the biggest lunatics on earth, doing all crazy things. And okay, we were crazy, but not in the way he described it. The thing about Alan, anyway, he drove us over to Hamburg, and then he left. So I don't know where he got the story from.
Let's talk about Ringo. You did not interview Ringo, but you did have some contact with him.
Well, the cool thing was that last year, when he turned 84 on July 7th, he has outdoor birthday parties at the Beverly Hills Park, where he did a sculpture for and painted it. And so he had his birthday party, so I got to go to that and saw him talk and saw how great he looked. He didn't look 84 at all. He looked incredible. And I was able to give a signed copy of my book to one of his staff members to give him for his birthday. So it was just an incredible day for me.
Let's talk about John. First of all, were there any conditions or anything ahead of time that you were asked to do or not to do as far as John and Yoko go?
Yes, publicist and record company said, do not talk to John about his past. Do not ask him about being a Beatles member or anything to do with that. And when we were flying to New York to interview John and Yoko, I was reading the Playboy interview that he'd done weeks before. And the writer of that asked John all about his past. And John was obviously really pissed and took it out on the writer. You could tell in the interview. So I knew definitely do not come up with questions about that. So I didn't. And the cool thing was that during the interview, John himself eventually brought up the Beatles and his first meetup with Paul McCartney and how the Beatles got together. And then even also cool, he brought up his original meeting with Yoko Ono and how they got together and their first date and their first recording and first making love. And that was just incredible. The whole interview was great.
Here's John Lennon talking to Laurie Kaye about what it was like coming back to music after all those years being away from it.
Came over me. I didn't know what came over me. Yes, I was possessed by this rock and roll devil, Just suddenly, if you pardon the expression, diarrhea of creativity.
John said, describing his earlier conversations with Yoko about the inspiration for their songs.
I had discussed going back in the studio, but I didn't have the material, but I wasn't worried about it because I thought, well, I haven't done it for a long time. Maybe if I switch into that, there'll be something there. But it just sort of came. And I called her because I was in Bermuda with Sean, and she was here in New York. I called her and I said, well, look, we were talking about recording. It must have triggered something off here because I'm getting all this stuff. And I started singing it to her down the phone or playing a cassette.
Then John echoed what Yoko had told us just before he'd arrived, that she would call him back a couple of hours later and tell him how when he sang a song to her, like I'm Losing You, she'd been inspired to come up with I'm Moving On, which she would then sing to him.
And then I'd be swimming or doing anything, suddenly something else would come, like starting over.
It was really truly a dialogue in that sense, that I would make one song and sing it to him over the phone. And then he reacts, to that in a way. And then he would write another song. And vice versa, he would write a song and I was saying, oh, all right, that's how he feels, okay.
I didn't really think about music at all. My guitar was sort of hung up on behind the bed, literally. And I don't think I took it down in 5 years. It wasn't always on. It was switched off. And when I sort of switched it on again, zap, all this stuff came through. So now we're already... we did enough material for the next album, almost half as much, and we're already talking about the third album, so we're full of vim and vigor. That's the part of me that's coming out again. That's why I'm enjoying it this time. I'm not trying to compete with my old self or compete with the young, new wave kids or anything like that are trying to go back and enjoy it as I enjoyed it originally. And it's working.
How did you find Yoko?
I loved talking to Yoko, and I realized that she liked me a lot right from the start because I was the only woman besides her in the room. And there were three guys, Dave Sholin, who was the co-interviewer, and Ron Hummel, who was our engineer producer, and the executive from Warner Brothers, Bert Keane, who recently passed away, sadly. And then me, I was the only female. So I felt that Yoko really just felt close to me in that way. And I loved talking to her about her relationship with John because I hadn't had any great relationships up to that point. I was 25, but I still hadn't had any lengthy lasting ones. So all I could think about was, even after the interview, when John and Yoko and I get together, I can't wait to hear how to really have a great interview. And we actually made plans at the end of the interview to all get together 2 weeks later in San Francisco to go to what would be Yoko Ono's favorite Japanese restaurant. And I was excited, not just because I love sushi and sashimi, but because I couldn't wait to have personal conversations and continue our friendship. And sadly, of course, that never happened because John was shot and killed.
What do you think attracted him to her?
Well, she looked great, number one, and she was incredibly smart, and she was a great writer. He loved her writing, and he actually said that he should have credited her with Imagine, that whole album. And she said, oh, don't worry about that. You dedicated the album to me. And he said, yes, but your book, Grapefruit, was all about Imagine, and then I should have given you credit for co-writing the song with me. And Yoko understood and wasn't upset about that. And the cool thing is that I brought my copy of Grapefruit to the Dakota with me to show them that I had it and how much I loved it. And Yoko was so excited because she said she and John hadn't seen that version, that edition of the book in years and years. So she was dying to autograph it for me. And John Lennon begged me to let him autograph it too, because he had done the introduction to the book. And I said, yes, of course, John. And he said, wow, great. And when he autographed it for me, along with Yoko, he said, you got to understand, I love it when people autograph their books for me. And I said, well, John, when and if I write my book, I will definitely autograph it to you and send it. And he looked at me again and pulled down his glasses and smiled at me and said, great, Laurie. So that, of course, was the real reason I wrote my book, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, my life leading up to John Lennon's last interview. I wrote it because really all I could think about is I would love to sign it for John and send it to him in heaven, which of course I couldn't do, but I did get to sign a copy and give it to his son, Sean. And hopefully Sean read it and loved it and gave it to his mother, Yoko, to read too.
One of the scariest parts of your book is your run-in with his killer outside the Dakota.
I never say his name ever because I don't want to give him the publicity. He was a really creepy guy who accosted me the minute I walked out of the Dakota front door after the interview, and he started bugging me and asking me, did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? What'd he say? And not only did he do that for quite a while, but then he followed me down the sidewalk as I was walking to my friend's office. I just kept telling him to leave, and finally he stopped following me and turned around. And I still feel guilty to this day for not letting the Dakota security team know about this creep, because maybe they would have been able to get rid of him so he wouldn't bother other people in front of the Dakota, and maybe he wouldn't have been there to kill John.
Your Today Show interview with Tom Brokaw and Jane Pauley the day after John was killed is on YouTube, and I watched it, and you were still feeling emotional after what had happened.
I'd been up all night at the RKO Radio headquarters after John was shot, being interviewed by reporters all over the country and some in other parts of the world. And I was feeling horribly tragic and then guilty because we turned on the TV, and that's when the reporters were saying that John just wasn't shot, he was killed. And they showed the guy who had admitted that he was the assassin. And I looked at him, and that's when I realized that was the guy who followed me up the sidewalk and kept bothering me. So I immediately felt guilty and horrible. And then by the morning after, the Today Show had called RKO headquarters and asked to have me on the show. So RKO sent me over there. And not only was I extremely tired because I hadn't slept, but I felt like I looked terrible and I felt terrible, and it was just awful. And I was feeling tragic and guilty and, like I said, tired and crummy. And it was just unfortunate. And plus, they totally identified me as an RKO radio employee, which got me into lots of trouble with my employee at the time, which was Drake Chenault. I was just freelancing for RKO then. So that's in my book a lot too.
What did you think of the way Brokaw and Pauley interviewed you?
Well, they could have asked better questions, I think. And they could have said that instead of RKO Rodeo, that I was RKO Radio. That was another goof.
They said RKO Rodeo?
Yes.
Oh my God.
And they were interviewing other people, but none of the others had interviewed John for Double Fantasy or anything like that. But they did also have the director of the Beatles movies, which was cool. So
Richard Lester.
Yeah, so that was cool to see him. So not in person, on the air. So
now that the book is out, how are you feeling?
Well, I'm happy to say that it's popular, and people tell me that normally when they read books, they just read a few pages at a time, but they start reading my book and they don't want to put it down. It makes me tell them the website so they can go check out all the podcasts that I do and all the reviews and the TV shows I've been on and stuff, and photos from the book. And also, of course, when they get the book, the cool thing is they get a John Lennon and Yoko Ono autograph too, because I put in the autographs that they gave me for my book, Grapefruit. So it's like people now personally have them too. And everybody loves that.
So your book is available in print, in ebook form, and audio, correct?
Yes.
And it's available through the usual places.
I should say that the audiobook that's available through Amazon or audible.com is self-voiced by me and includes actual quotes from interviews I've done. So that's really cool. And you can get it everywhere from Amazon to so many bookstore online sites and my publisher's website. And it's best to check out the purchase section of the website, which is confessionsofArockandrollnamedropper.com. to find out so many sources of where to get the book, because it's available not just all over the country, but you can get it at bookstores in England and all over.
Okay. Last question, or last questions. Beatle album preferences, mono or stereo?
Well, that's hard to say. I love them all, to be honest. I mean, stereo, sure, but mono sounds good too. It's,
Okay.
whatever I have on my albums, I listen to still on my album player. And I've been a fan of every single Beatles album since I first heard each one, plus the bulk of records released by members of the Fab Four after the band broke up. And it's hard to name my total fave, but Please Please Me was no doubt my original favorite album. It was released in early 1963 and featured lots of great songs, everything from Love Me Do to Ask Me Why, I Saw Her Standing There, and so many more.
Well, that answers that. You just answered my second question, which was UK or US albums. You like really the UK albums more than the US albums, or do you like them all?
I love them all, but the UK albums were first. So that was
okay.
what I heard.
Laurie Kaye, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. Best of luck with your book. And, I hope at some point we can talk again.
My pleasure. I hope so too. But I want you to tell me how much you liked my book.
Yes, I really enjoyed your book. It's a great book, and I really recommend it. So
thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll be back with more. The breaking news as we're taping this on Sunday afternoon is that The Who have fired Zach Starkey for a second time. In a post on Twitter, the group said The Who are heading for retirement, whereas Zach is 20 years younger and has a great future with his new band and other exciting projects. He needs to devote all his energy into making it all a success. We both wish him all the luck in the world. Scott DeVowers, who fans will know him from Roger's solo tours, will be replacing Zach. We hope all our fans will welcome him. In response, Zach said the firing was because he wouldn't tell fans a lie for them. He said, quote, I was fired 2 weeks after reinstatement and asked to make a statement saying I had quit The Who to pursue my other musical endeavors. This would be a lie. I love The Who and would never have quit. So I didn't make the statement. Quitting The Who would also have let down the countless amazing people who stood up for me. Thank you all a million times over and more. Through the weeks of mayhem of me going in and out, and in and out like a bleeding squeeze box. He ended the statement with an X. The reaction on social media initially looks to be very much against Zach's firing, which isn't really surprising. At any rate, best of luck, Zach. We want to thank Laurie Kaye for coming on the show today and talking about her book, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview. And we suggest you pick up the book, and especially the audio book, because it has the excerpts and more of her interviews with rock stars, including John and Yoko, Paul and Linda, and George Harrison and George Martin. That's all for this time. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have a comment or a suggestion, please write to us at BeatlesNewsBriefs@gmail.com. Subscribe to us where you get your podcasts so you will get first word on when our shows are released. And join our Beatles News and Information group on Facebook, which is filled with just that, news and information. We'd love to have you. We also have chats, by the way, going on about various Beatle topics, and you're welcome to join in on those too. So join us next time. Until then, this is Steve Marinucci saying,
"Be seeing you." keep that one. Mark it fab.
What a show! What a show! Oh, wonderful, wonderful.